Well, welcome back once again. I find myself with no time to game. And this week is going to be, I think, a little bit of a shorter episode, but for some obvious reasons and one really, really good reason, which is that I really loved this week's game. It's just I found myself a little bit extra limited on time this week, which is kind of the nature of the show, is to give you recommendations that you're able to take on the go, stuff that's really good at being portable. When it comes to retro games, obviously the Game Boy Color is really good at that. And yet sometimes, I'll just find myself like being able to recommend stuff even though I haven't quite gotten all the way through them yet. So this week I actually had a viewer requested game, which is a game that is only in Japan, but it's translated as For Whom the Frog Bell Tolls. Tolls? Yeah, I don't know. Yeah, I don't know what the actual title is in Japanese, but this game has a fan translation and this is what it gets converted into. So I would really recommend you check this out. It's not too hard to patch Game Boy Color games, and you are actually going to, I think, want to do that for this one. Because there's a little bit of more intricacy involved. Not only with just the story, you do miss out on a lot of story beats and stuff like that, but I think the mechanics and stuff, it'll be a little bit confusing if you don't understand Japanese and you try to play this through. So this is something that we never got in the States, and I think part of why I say it's a good reason that this is a shorter video is because I haven't beaten it yet. And so I'll tell you straight out, I haven't gotten super far into it yet, but this is a game that I do intend on beating. So in addition to what I play on this channel, this is going to be something that I really want to see through to the end because I really liked it that much. Let's just call it like Frog Bells for short. This is a game that essentially is like, if you've kind of seen the pattern in my videos recently, I've played a lot of stuff that is very Zelda inspired. And so right away when you hop into it, I was incredibly impressed. So like, this is kind of like, let me set up the scene, like you started off, it's a fun little story, rivalry between two princesses, and you guys are bickering back and forth and whatnot and stuff. And so you start off the island, like kind of trailing behind, like take a ship to go rescue a princess in a faraway land. And your first experience when you first arrive, it's like you hear this badass little tune with like waves and stuff like that in the background. And yeah, it's a Game Boy. I think I've been saying color, but my bad, it's an original Game Boy game. Despite the limited graphics and stuff like that, right away I was like, I could tell I'm gonna dig this because it's just very like atmospheric, like the sound of the 8-bit waves crashing and you're like starting off on like a remote island. It's already kind of setting you up for an adventure. And I think just from like the opening scene alone, like you could kind of get a gist for the type of sense of humor that this game is going to have. This is also why I really recommend translating it because right away, like the jokes and stuff like that they're pretty fun. It's like very old school, like 90s Nintendo. Just seeing like the sense of humor and stuff like that alone makes you wonder why it never got brought over. But hey, more gems for us to dig through. To kind of explain the gist of what the game is about, I'll try to be like a little bit vague about it so you can like really dig into it yourself and let me know what you think. But this is a game that goes between two different it's think classic Zelda, right? You got the overworld and you wander around maps and towns and stuff like that. You talk to the NPCs, their shops, all that good stuff. You can also enter buildings or areas, and that's when it'll switch to just a classic 2D platformer. And I'm pretty impressed with just how the controls feel in this game. It's really straightforward, When you enter the overworld, it just straight up goes into like, not only can you obviously enter things like just think classic RPG status, but when you enter a fight on the overworld map, it's very old school RPG. So think like, like whatever your stats are, I think you've got like life, attack, and speed in this game. That's going to determine the outcome of the fight. It kind of enters like this auto battle mode, and whatever enemy you're facing, sometimes you won't like, you'll need like a certain stat that'll need to be high enough in order to beat that enemy. Certain enemies, like you'll have to have a higher speed stat than them in order to clear their hearts out before yours. But everything is very like organic. Everything's very straightforward to figure out. And like just in little details alone, you could tell that a lot of care went into this game because it's very much set up so that you automatically figure all this stuff out. One of the things that I ran to right away in the overworld was a stone that completely heals you, so this game is very open about letting you try things. And if you mess up, that's totally cool because not only are there like spots where you can, kind of come back to and restore all your hearts, you're able to, it's one of those Game Boy games that lets you save at any time too. So kind of part of the learning the game is just like learning when to save, so you don't have to backtrack too much. It's kind of on you basically if you're not like saving as much as possible because you never know when it's like you're gonna need a certain item. And even then, the game's pretty forgiving because eventually you get a item that lets you just warp to the start of a dungeon. So hopefully it describes that part of the game because the overworld thing is its own thing. But in addition to that, uh, and this is also something that affects both sides of it, but I think more so the platforming, you get to transform. So you're typically a prince. Prince is the strongest of all of your transformations, and he's got a couple of unique abilities. He's able to talk to most people, but as the name suggests, you're also able to transform into a frog. And so it's pretty hilarious how it all goes down. It's very like classic, like just like anime type of humor, you know. But as a frog, you're able to do a couple of things that you're not able to as a prince. First of all, swim. Unfortunately, your highness is not able to swim. Your jump is a lot higher. It changes. Certain enemies you're not able to defeat anymore. You can't really talk to NPCs anymore, but you can talk to other frogs. And I think certain NPCs that are like I guess they're like part frog. I haven't quite figured that out yet, but they're called Croakians, and so they can understand frog. And so far, I've also gotten an additional transformation where you transform into a snake, which also comes with its own unique set of abilities. They're all super straightforward to figure out how mechanically they work out. Like, especially when you enter the platformer sections, because on the overworld, when you transform, it kind of mostly affects how you interact with the environment / get into those auto fights I was talking to earlier. Like, as a frog, you're able to eat insects and they heal you, but if you try to, enter a fight with like certain things like poisonous snakes or certain guards, you'll probably get your ass whipped as a frog. But where it really shines is in the platformer sections. As a frog, like I said earlier, you're able to swim. Your jumps are a lot higher. There's certain things that you can only do as a frog, like access like these fast travel points. And so the main strategy of the game is when you enter these platformer sections, you kind of want to be able to manage your transformations. So again, I've only gotten as far as to get a frog transformation and a snake transformation, each with their unique abilities. Like the snake lets you crawl through little certain crawl spaces, transform certain enemies into blocks you can jump on when you just kill the enemies. And so you get these items and stuff like that like it's not as straightforward as like hit A to transform. Like some of them are, but you only get a limited amount of items / sometimes you'll encounter like put it this way, so far I have no perfect item to transform into a frog. That mainly happens when I jump into water. When the prince jumps into water, you just automatically transform into a frog. And so sometimes the platformer levels are based off of like there's certain sections where you're kind of forced to jump into water, and so now you have to figure out a certain part of it as a frog. But then the next section is like you better make sure you have a way to transform back, because there isn't an item that just lets you tap it and you transform back into the prince, because you're going to need the prince for this part of the platformer level. And so it's really fascinating in that sense. It's almost like a little bit of like you have to figure out kind of a puzzle in a sense for these levels. And that's where like the save function is really, really handy, because it's like, certain things you do want items to transform at certain parts of the level. So you do want to make sure you're prepared. And it's really easy, I think, to get swept up in the story and like the charm of the game and just kind of like, oh shoot, like I kind of have to strategize a little bit. Not the end of the world again if you mess something up, because you can save at any time. And it's really fun to figure out. Like even when I have to backtrack and stuff like that, it's pretty straightforward and it's not too frustrating. As for like the feel of the game itself, it's incredibly charming. It's just really like probably out of all the games I play on this channel, might have my favorite Game Boy music so far. Like every song so far has been really memorable, really atmospheric. Just the little details like are just like a chef's kiss. Like I think I mentioned the waves at the start of the game when you first land on the island, But even in certain things, like when you hit the pause and like the pause menu stretches upwards, like it's like some kind of like 90s cartoon, the way that like you can try to, skip ahead, like in certain parts of the story, like you'll try to be like, well, maybe I'll go this way because I don't want to like listen to what the main characters are saying. Like, and the developers will think of it, like they'll block off your way, or they'll have like certain story events, like at one point there's a literal earthquake that will stop you from like, I just got this new form. I wonder if I can go here. It's like, nope. And so between stuff like that, just the fun story, the great music, the charming graphics, it's just really, really cool. Like when you see like full-blown cutscenes, I think, in a Game Boy Color game. There's certain scenes, like I won't spoil too many of them, that are really fun. It's got that like classic like 90s anime style, like that pixel art and stuff like that you would see. Honestly, mostly in puzzle games from this era, but it's always a real pleasure to see it in like an RPG. Maybe I'm just not used to it because, America and whatnot, and I didn't grow up on too many, like, I guess, anime influenced RPGs and stuff like that. But in terms of presentations, they really nailed it. I really, really had a great time with this game so far. I honestly really intend to just play it all the way through on my own. And I think maybe I'll make like a update video once I get that cleared, because like everything has so far pretty much blown me away. As a kid, I only briefly played like Link's Awakening. I never got all the way through it. I remember I borrowed a copy off of a friend. I remember that blowing my mind so much as a kid, because it was just like very like, it's an old school Game Boy. When I was a kid, like my first real Game Boy that I had was already the Advance. And so obviously that's like its own powerhouse and stuff like that. So when I got to try like old school Game Boy games as a kid, playing Link's Awakening while I had it for a little bit from my friend was like mind blowing, because it just felt humongous. And when you're a kid, like I think when the graphics are simpler, you just imagine like these really expansive worlds. You like have voices for characters inside of your head. And so playing Frog Bells, like that's the kind of vibe that I got, I think, playing through it, where yes, it's on the Game Boy and the old school, like classic one at that, but the way that they like have animations played through, the way that the graphics look, the way that all of the sound design just comes together, it really just completely blew me away. And I think this would have been something that like I had that type of feeling the same as I did with Link's Awakening as a kid. I think for this series, I'm getting rid of the whole like, let's see if we can beat this game in a week's time type of like challenge for myself. A, because I usually don't hit it. My time really is that limited. But B, I think it encourages more like, it just kind of encourages, I think, more videos being made, because now it's more of like, I check this out and here's my thoughts, and if I really like something, I'll see if I can do a more in-depth video about it. But I think it'll help me keep the ball rolling for this series, so I'm able to check something new out every week. Despite being a little bit busier this past week, I don't think I would have been able to clear this within a week's time, because it is a bit of a bigger game so far. And it's a good thing. Like I said at the start of the video, it's because I really did take my time to digest this and like have a good time with it and like get down with the mechanics and learn it. It was awesome. But just know that I think if you're looking for something that's very pick up and play, this will still do it, but it may be something that will require all of your attention, I think. Because I tend to be someone that doesn't like to balance too many games at once. Like at most I'll have 3, and even like usually like out of those 3, only 1 is a little bit heavier on the story side. The other 2 are usually more like just for funsies, really quick, really brief, usually a puzzle game or some type of quick like, dungeon crawler. Obviously you know from my channel that I'm a big fan of Cave Noir. So this might be like my current, like, okay, like this is a little bit more involved. So let me I want to clear this all the way through. So let's kind of give it its own dedicated time slot. So pick up and play, sure. Portable, of course, it's a Game Boy game, but it will be a little bit more involved. But I will say you will have a great time with it. It's graphically, sonically, and just like in terms of gameplay, really fun. One of the more impressive Game Boy games I've played so far, because there's a whole big library. Again, the Advance was my first system, so there's a whole big Game Boy library I have yet to check out fully. I think the last time I remember being impressed with like gameplay like this much though was probably like just straight up when I played Mario Land like on the Game Boy. I played that at like maybe a couple months ago for the first time ever, and I was pretty impressed. So the platformer is like, it's not Mario Brothers, but the way that you have to figure out your transformations, the way you get through the stages, the way that the story's progressing is a really fun story. All the characters are really fun. I named my main character Prince Boob, and your rival is named Prince Richard. So it's a really just a good time so far. And yeah, I'd hardly recommend this game 100%. I have to give it a number rating. So far to me, I haven't beat it all the way through, but I would honestly give it like a high 8 or maybe a 9 out of 10. Definitely recommend it for sure, even though I haven't beaten it yet. And we'll see where this takes me. Again, I'll see if I can do like a more updated video once I'm done. But yeah, I think that's about all the thoughts I have on that so far. That's going to be this week's game for our little club that we got going on here. Other than that, Went ahead and rolled random for the next game already so far. I got a couple things going on, so I'm going to do a random game this week. And we're going to be checking out something that I've always heard about, but never really fully bothered to check out. It's kind of topical for some reason. We got none other than the game from the King of Pop himself. So we're going to see if this is just straight up meme status or if it's actually going to be worth playing. We'll see. I got a week to kind of go through it and give my thoughts. Sega Genesis, my first Genesis game on this channel so far. So it's might actually be doable to beat this in a week. We'll see. I don't know. Bit of a more of an old school platformer, so we'll see how it goes. But those are all the updates. I did just start school recently too, so between like my music making and school and obviously work, I do find myself even like I think a little bit more limited on time, but I think we'll still be able to like for sure try like for our weekly videos here. I did try a bit of an experiment the past week. Let me know what you think. Right, I did try like kind of a midweek upload, but maybe that might be more than I can, like I might be biting off more than I can chew, so I'll see if I keep that. But if you watched up to this point, I appreciate you. Let me know what you think about this game, and if you have any recommendations that are similar to this one, let me know down below. Other than that, like the video. I would appreciate it so much if you did, and subscribe if you're really interested and want to keep up with the series. But I think that'll about do it. I got to get to class here. Topical, yay. And I'll see you guys in a week's time.